24% of women in Ghana will face domestic violence, according to UN Women. Habiba is one of that 24%.
My husband physically abused me, and he wants to make sure he destroys my face. He had a ring on, punched under my eye, then blood gushed out and spilled onto the wall. Then I was just bleeding from my nose onto the ground. So he was satisfied and said, "You can have me locked up. I do not fear the law."
So it is on my side to apologize to Habiba since I have touched her.
He beat the hell out of me. In fact, he punched my face and my head so many times. He just kept punching my face and punching my face.
At the hospital, her face bloodied, deep cuts and bruises on her face, blurred vision, and her eyes now swollen almost shut. Habiba still had to pay for her own medical treatment. Medical care is needed to treat her wounds. It's also needed to gather evidence. No evidence, no case, no prosecution. The law should pay for medical treatment. It did not. Why?
Miaro, miara, endo miaro, miara, ejumeye, hinabeye, miaro, miara, endo miaro, miara, obrey, hinabebo, miaro, miara, endo miaro, miara, semi besini kwemba, miaro. Asemi miara, asemi besini kwemba miara, asemi besini kwemba miara, obrei besini kwemba miara, miaro miara, endo miaro miara.
Akwaba, and thanks for joining us for another wonderful episode of GH Reflections. This week, we will continue with our discussion on gender and sexuality in Ghana. Today, we will discuss the pervasiveness of sexual and gender-based violence. But before we continue, I want to warn our viewers that today's conversation could be uncomfortable, and some viewers might find the discussion and videos that we would show disturbing and re-traumatizing. To help me engage and also to help all of us engage in this important conversation, I do have some panelists. I do have, first I'm going to introduce Bashiratu Kamal, Muslim, who is a feminist organizer, development practitioner, journalist, unionist, and a gender and labor specialist. She currently works with a trade union where she champions collective agreements, policies, and legislations that are responsive to the needs of women workers in the workplace. She also leads several union campaigns on the provision of childcare services, maternity protection, and eliminating violence and sexual harassment at the workplace. I also do have Samuel Aboche. Samuel is the campaign and fundraising coordinator at Amnesty International Ghana, a position he has held since January 2018. Samuel has an MPhil in human rights from the University of Education Winneba, and a Bachelor's of Arts degree in social work and sociology with psychology from the University of Ghana, Legon. He also holds a diploma with distinction in youth in development work from the University of Ghana, a diploma in social work from the School of Social Work, and a diploma in business studies from Accra Polytechnic. And finally, we have Daiwol Erape, who is an experienced social development professional with over 20 years of experience as a teacher, student, leader, and gender and women's rights advocate. She has worked at the community, regional, and national levels in Ghana. She also holds a bachelor's degree in home economics, a postgraduate honors in gender and transformation from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, with an elective in gender and violence and research in women's sexual and reproductive health. Finally, she holds a master's degree in development management from KNUST. So as you can see, we will definitely have a wonderful conversation today. So to start us off in terms of initiating the conversation today, we want to start with generally what is sexual and gender-based violence and what form does it take? So let's start a conversation with this particular question, and any one of you could jump in, or else I can call somebody, but any one of you could jump in. What is sexual and gender-based violence?
Okay, thank you and good evening to all our listeners. When we speak about sexual and gender-based violence, it is just any act of violence, sexual, physical, or any other form, that is done to a person as a result of the person's gender identity, as a result of the person's biological sex, or as a result of socially constructed norms that a person is expected to perform. So this kind of violence takes different forms and different shapes. And we can talk about physical, where you have abuses like what we just saw in the video. We have battery, where we have intimate, severe corporal punishment, just any physical harm to the human body. We also have things such as burning, acid baths, etc. They are all physical forms of abuse. And then also when you look at our Domestic Violence Act, deprivation of physical needs like food, shelter, clothing also forms part of the physical abuse. And then also we have sexual violence. Sexual violence also takes different forms and shapes. And for sexual violence, it's any kind of sexual act that affects the sexual integrity of the person. It doesn't matter whether there is penetration or there is any sexual intercourse, but if there is any sexual contact or sexual act or any sexual, let me say, word that affect the sexual integrity of the individual, it is deemed as sexual violence. I believe we'll be going into the different forms later. Then we look at psychological violence, economic violence, and so on and so forth. Then another aspect that we really do not talk about, which underlines violence when it comes to the Ghanaian context, is our harmful cultural practices. They are also diverse and many. So for me, this is what I would say sexual and gender-based violence and its forms are.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask Bashir.
Thank
Bashir,
you.
yeah. Oh, no worries. Bashir, can you tell us maybe what sexual and gender-based violence is at the workplace? Since you have done some work, with organizing people at the workplace, can you tell us more about how sexual and gender-based violence occurs at the workplace?
Thank you and good evening to your listeners and viewers. I hope I'm very clear.
Right, you are, yes.
Because my internet keeps breaking. I don't know what is happening in Bali now. Okay, so let me say that the definition and information that Daiwo gave, it's not so different at the workplace. What is different is mostly the existence of quid pro quo, that is people's expectation, especially people with power, positions of power, expecting some other people who are lower than them in the organizational ladder to give something in return for something. So it can be anything from seeking for job, from attending an interview, from seeking promotion, and from assessing what is actually your right at the workplace as a worker. And this mostly happen due to the unequal power relations and the structures that we have in the workplace, which is mostly unfriendly to vulnerable groups. One, you do not even have a place you can go and report a case involving a sexual or gender-based violence. Two, in the Ghanaian context, we do not have a specific law or policy that addresses issues of sexual and gender-based violence in the workspace. If you look at what is in the Labor Act, it only defines what is sexual harassment, nothing on violence, actually. And then under the section on occupational safety and health, there's nothing. Then if you go to the section on unfair termination of appointments, there's something about sexual harassment, which says that if a person has reported a case of sexual harassment, you cannot, under any circumstances, sack the person or dismiss the person. Because if you do that and the person is able to prove that it is because of the previous case they reported, then that makes it a case of discrimination and a case of sexual discrimination as well. And if you look at how the workplace is structured, we are governed by policies. They have the workers' handbook, and then we have the laws of Ghana. The Labor Act is the one that gives the minimum standard to every worker, to every employer, and then it also protects workers. Beyond the Labor Act, in the National Constitution, little is said about sexual harassment except for the part around freedom of association and also the part around non-discrimination due on the basis of religion or sex. So in the end, it is a case of an employer or the person in position of power having more strength and more power to be able to exploit and abuse somebody who is looking for a job, somebody who is coming for a job interview, somebody who is in the job and is asking for something that might even be their right, or somebody who is due for promotion and someone is asking them to give something in return for that promotion. So that is mainly the ones that are very common in the workplace. And then we have the other one that is the hostile work environment. So the one that deals with the hostile work environment comes in many forms. You go to the workplace and on your desk, somebody scribbled something like sweetheart. You are going to the washroom and someone is consistently harassing you. Or you go to the washroom and you find nude pictures or pornographic materials pasted all over the washrooms. You are with your colleagues in the office, and then some offices have a special internet service that they use, so they are able to send materials to themselves in the office space. And someone is consistently sending you obscene, unwanted images or videos that makes you very uncomfortable. Your colleague or boss calls you to the office, and then they are asking you to help them with something. You go to the computer, and the first thing you see is a sexual something. Maybe it's a pornographic material or a nude picture or
I think we might have lost Bashira too, but we will come back to that comment because I think she is definitely referencing a very important part of this conversation, just as Daivo also talked about. So Samuel, I have a question for Samuel. Ask Bashira to tries to join us. Samuel, so how is sexual and gender-based violence a human rights issue? Can we make the connection for our viewers and our listeners how this is actually a human rights issue? Is Samuel still here?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thanks so much.
Yes, absolutely. It is a human rights issue. Human right is basically all the entitlement, whether coded or uncoded, that is accorded to us as a human being. So of course, men are human beings and women are human beings as well. So any act that is perpetrated against any of the two has a human right dimension. I've listened to the other speakers who have mentioned various manifestations of gender-based violence, and I will just add two of them and then link it to human right abuse. For example, child marriage. Child marriage. When you marry a child, you are basically violating the rights of the child, the right of the child to childhood. You are depriving the child of childhood. You are forcing the child to become an adult, to do what adults do, which the child might not be prepared enough, both physically, psychologically, economically, all of them, to undertake the responsibility of adult. So basically, that is it. You are depriving the child of education. You are depriving the child of the right to self-development, self-determination.
I think we might have lost Samuel as well. Okay, so have we lost all three of them, maybe? Okay. So as we wait for them to reconnect, okay, so Daivel is back. Daivel, do you want to maybe take over the conversation that Samuel was trying to elaborate to our viewers here in terms of the connection between sexual and gender-based violence and human rights, why this is a human rights issue? Oh, and Bashirati is back, so we can also get her to speak eventually. But Daivel, if you want to maybe take over.
Yeah. So every human being, every individual, every state is governed by laws. Apart from that, as human beings, we all have the right to our freedom and to our bodily integrity. And so any form of sexual abuse, it's a violation of that bodily integrity. Now, as a country, we have our constitution, which governs our actions and inactions. And within our constitution, we all have a right to life, a right to our physical, social, and cultural being.
Right.
Aside that, we also have different laws. We have the Criminal Offences Act, which also determines which areas of sexual conduct forms a human rights abuse. Then we have our Domestic Violence Act, which also identifies some of these things as abuse of a person's human rights. And so sexual and gender-based violence in the context of Ghana is a violation of the human rights of every individual or every victim or individual that experiences these forms of rights. One, according to our constitution. Two, our Criminal Offences Act. And then three, also our Domestic Violence Act. Apart from the local level, Ghana as a country, I know we have also acceded to many international, regional protocols, agreements, and all that. And all this enjoins us to protect the fundamental human rights of individuals and of citizens. And most of these agreements we have signed, like the International Convention on Human Rights, we have all these agreements we have signed. And all this points to the fact that we all have the right to our sexual integrity. We have the right to be protected from sexual abuse and violation. And then we have the right to live a peaceful and a comfortable life. And so any form of abuse, I would say, that contravenes these laws and also contravenes these international agreements and protocols that we as a country have acceded to, it's a violation of the human rights of the individual.
Okay, thanks so much for. And I know Bashirati is back. And do you want to complete that sentence? Your sentence that you were saying earlier. Do you want to complete your response, and then we can move on to the next question, or you want us to move on to the next question? Can you hear me, Bashir, too? All right, so maybe we will come back to Samuel is here. Samuel, do you want to complete what you were saying earlier? Are you still here? Are you still joining? Are you still with us? Okay. Well, I guess we will move on to the next question here, and hopefully they might join us in response to the next question. So, I guess you and I and Eric here, we will jump onto this conversation then. So, even though some men experience gender-based violence, we are not kidding ourselves when we say, of course, women are disproportionately affected by gender-based violence. So the question here is, what produces, or what is causing this disproportionate amount of women to experience gender-based violence? So Daryl, do you want to maybe respond to that? Oh, we can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. So it's a fact that men also experience sexual and gender-based violence. But when you look at our data, when you look at our statistics, women are disproportionately affected.
Right.
That is a fact. And I will say that the first point of call for reasons why women could be disproportionately affected, one could be the fact that culturally, women are socialized to believe that we are the weaker vessels, and so mostly we are at the receiving end of some of these things. Apart from that, culturally, you realize that a lot of these things are also intimate partner violence. And in our culture, you realize that when it comes to relationships and marriage, men are given the ultimate responsibility as the ones taking the initiative to propose to the lady, to marry the lady, and all that. So some men see it as a form of authority to abuse, but which should not be the case. Apart from that, sometimes there are people who, as children, are exposed to abuse in the family. And so as they grow up, they imbibe violence as part of life. So, for example, a girl who grows up in a home where she sees the mother being beaten every day, grows up to feel that it is normal. It is a show of love for a woman to be beaten. So she receives it and imbibes it, and it becomes part of her. And that is one of the reasons why we should be able to advocate against violence in the home. And for a man or a boy who also grows up in a home, seeing the father abusing every day, imbibes similar behaviors. And then as he grows, he also starts the abuse. Now, we are in a patriarchal society where in the society, men are the leaders. When you go to the community level, when you go to the houses of chiefs, where certain decisions are made, you realize that a lot of men are in the decision-making positions. And so some of these abuses, when it comes to the fore, even within the community setting, it is not handled appropriately. Mostly, sometimes you realize that the woman who is abused is even accused and blamed for being too known. Let me just use it like that. And that is why she's being abused. I have personally seen a couple of them like that before, where the woman was abused by the husband, reported, and then she was told that it was because you were speaking too much. But this should not be the case. So the issues could be numerous, the issues could be many. Apart from that, there are some women who also don't have any economic power. And so once they are in the relationship, their economic power, their power to be an equal partner in the relationship is curtailed. So the man is able to do anything to that woman without looking back. And so these are some of the issues I can raise as cause. Maybe other panelists can also come in with others. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks so much. This is great. Bashir, can you contribute to this as well in the sense that we are talking about why are women disproportionately the survivors, I should say, of gender-based violence?
Thank you so much. Sorry, my internet was giving me trouble, so I have
No
to be
worries.
switching into 3 different networks. Okay, so I listened into a couple of the things Daiwo mentioned, and I'll only add a few to what she mentioned, and that includes some of the toxic narratives that we have in our system. So you hear someone, and this is so popular that people feel very comfortable, to talk about them on social media. Use what you have to get what you want. When you do that, what are you trying to say? That you normalize encouraging women to use their bodies against their wish, to access things that might even be their own right, according to laws. Then this popular assertion about no means yes, because ọbaa deɛ ɔbɛkyerɛ ne ho kakra ansa. Sɛ bɛrima pɛ sɛ ɔne ɔbaa da, ɔbaa no bɛkyerɛ ne ho nti wo na ɛwɔ so wɔma w'ani yɛ den. Some of these narratives do not help, because I am saying no, you are insisting my no means yes, and you are insisting that if you press further, my no will turn to yes. So you end up using force and coercing me. Then issues around power relations. I will mention how women are disproportionately represented in the ladder of leadership in all spheres. So when laws are made, it is assumed that the laws are made to protect women. But in reality, the laws are made to protect everyone, because our needs are different from the needs of men. So if you push further, you will realize that you need women, one, to be represented, to participate and get involved in the processes of making laws and implementation. Otherwise, you still have a gap where the majority of the beneficiaries will end up being men, who are also in the positions of power to determine where we focus on in terms of implementation and how resources are turned out and allocated. Then there is an issue around the notion of women are the only people who can't control their own bodies, which is very sad. That people feel so entitled to the bodies of women because, one, society has bestowed on them that privilege, to be in charge of a woman, including her sexuality and everything. So a woman cannot even make decisions around, I just give birth through CS. I can't have sex in the next 2 months. It is a problem. Then we also have issues around the sexual and reproductive rights of women, which is also linked with the previous comment I made. That once a woman is not even allowed, to talk about her body, the things that affect her, how she wants the body to be, how she wants to use it, what is happening to her body, but then she needs permission from someone. And that person decides to give that permission or not, and if she insists, can end in a form of violence. Then there are issues around how our marriages are conducted. When a marriage is conducted, during engagement ceremonies, we've seen videos around, we've heard them, we've gone to engagement ceremonies and wedding ceremonies and heard some of these comments, including Obadie, the man is the head of the home. Everything he wants, you have to do it. Ukwana so obuwa interest on pewasem, but etia kakra de ye. You know, so narratives are like that. Do not help because you have already differentiated that one is supposed to be the victim and one is supposed to be a perpetrator at all times. You know, and people feel that it is in the right direction because of how our orientation has been, the way we were brought up, how society continues to entrench some of these toxic narrative, and also find ways of making sure that all these things stays as they are, even though activists are doing their best. Then the issue around the bride price, which means that a woman has been sold to you. So you go and pay 100 cedis and you think that gives you the right to consistently and continuously batter somebody in the home or have your way with her body and everything. You know, so you have people believing that the bride price is the price you pay to own a human being, which is not so. How much did you pay? 100 Ghana cedis. 100 Ghana cedis, which cannot even pay the school fees of your what? A 2-month-old baby if you put her into a crèche. You know, and then they believe that marriage is an achievement. So by virtue of that, a lot more people decide to keep quiet and stay in abusive relationship and take whatever is turned out to them. And in the labor market, there are no jobs. So you ask the question, are bad jobs better than no jobs? And majority of the people will tell you yes. Because at the end of the day, I'll get some 200 Ghana cedis or 300 Ghana cedis. So as a worker is being harassed at the workplace, but because of the livelihood they are going to enjoy, they are not talking about it. They are not able to voice it out. Workers are being raped at the workplace. Nobody is talking about it because the workers themselves are not ready to follow up with the cases. And the one issue that we find it difficult to even allow discussions around, which is the issue around religion, the contribution of religion to sexual and gender-based violence in our spaces. One, some of us keep saying that there is mostly sometimes the misrepresentation, misinterpretation, and then there's also an issue around translation, you know, of religious texts. And when people are preaching, the text is written in black and white, but they'll tell you you need a certain scholar or you need somebody to come and explain what the text means. And we all know how problematic some of the texts in our religious books are. And we also know that majority of those who are the ones who have the power to interpret these religious texts and do these teachings are men. Who wants to lose the privilege that society bestowed on them freely? You know, so consistently, the narrative is around protecting a certain privilege, and the biases of people who are trying to protect these privileges come to play when they are talking about issues around marriage, issues around family setting, issues around power and control, issues around who should submit, who should not submit. But in the end, marriage is partnership. I'm not sure God put us on this earth planet to come and suffer. Because if God created us in his image, then why would he say that somebody should have the power to beat me and destroy that image that God gave to me? You know, so there are lots of problematic things that are surrounding issues around sexual and gender-based violence. And these are the few. And also in the workplace, there's also the issue about power relations that exist. That you go to a workplace and then in the management board, there's only one woman and she's a secretary taking minutes. So when laws are supposed to even be made or policies are supposed to be made at the workplace, she doesn't have a voice because all she does is take the minutes. And then you find women in the lowest paying jobs, and casualization, you know, the new forms of employment has also contributed immensely to women being discriminated. So I'm talking about issues dealing with fissuring and the casualization, outsourcing, contracting, you know, and people are contracted to work 6 months. So when you work for 5 months, 3 weeks, the contract is abrogated and it is expected to be renewed. So if you have misbehaved according to them, in quotes, if they think that they made advances that you refused or you reported them, it means there's a high possibility that your contract might not be renewed. So you end up losing your job. And this affects women in a lot of ways, you know. So it happens, and it also forces a lot of women to accept things that they are uncomfortable with, things that are unwanted for them, and then importunate advances that some of these supervisors make because you want your name to end up on a list that gives you money, for you to survive on. So these are a few of the issues.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is quite elaborate, and I think this is what our listeners and our viewers do want to see, this complex picture. So we are talking about gender-based violence, but we can see how a lot of different issues come together to produce the gender-based violence. It's not just an one-time individualized issue, but I can see from what you're saying between Will's comment and you and your comment that this is a structural issue, a structure in which it intersects in different ways. So maybe if someone is to hear, I would like to hear Samuel's perspective in terms of how has the quarantine based on COVID-19 pandemic or the coronavirus pandemic maybe increase or sort of influence even gender-based violence. So is Samuel here? Okay. Well, maybe we might come back to Samuel. So we might come back to Samuel in that question. But anyone wants to maybe jump on quickly, maybe a very short comment about how has the coronavirus pandemic even exacerbated this issue? I mean, I know based in the United States, this was an issue in the sense that as Will talked about, that this is an intimate partner violence. So if if we have to quarantine in the same place, I'm sure it will exacerbate the conditions that produces the gender-based violence. So does anyone want to sort of quickly respond to that particular question? Yes.
I'd like to comment.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so it did create a host of problems for us, actually, the pandemic. And right. Prior to the COVID-19, it was an issue. And then when COVID-19 started, it became more of an issue. And then during the period of a partial lockdown, it was. And then after it was lifted, and some of our children were still at home because schools were still closed. Mm-hmm. So whilst parents were away working, children were exposed to some of these sexual and gender-based violence in so many ways. And let me say, I did a rapid assessment for the Star Ghana Foundation on the impact of COVID on sexual and gender-based violence, looking at witchcraft, cyberbullying, and also teenage pregnancy. And then I'm currently doing one for FIDA Ghana, which is also looking at persons living with disability, and other vulnerable groups, women and girls. And if you look at the sort of reports that the police is reporting, some of the civil society groups are reporting, some of government agencies like DOFSU are reporting, then you will realize how deep-rooted our case is. So during the time of the partial lockdown, we all know that due to COVID, we are all suffering some form of economic devastation. So these stresses were putting a lot of pressure on people. So people are going home for 3 weeks. Now, also remember, like I mentioned earlier, that the type of job people do determine whether they will have food in the next 6 months. So you are not entitled to any leave days in the first place. So going home, you are not going to be paid for that 3 weeks period that you are going to lose. And as it is, you've already lost some money because schools were closed 2 weeks earlier. So your children have been home. So eating continues unabated, And then you needed to hoard food. And because of COVID and the announcement of the lockdown and everything, prices of food prices hiked all of a sudden. So you buy Gary 9 cedis and end up buying it at 20 cedis. So people were spending 3 times more of what they would spend on a normal and regular basis to buy food and keep it in the house. Now you are stuck in the same home. Before that, some people were suffering abuses from their partners. And they are stuck in the home with that partner and your children. Now children will play, children will watch television, children will make noise, children will be children. And if someone does not take it, so for instance, someone can just shout on the wife that, can you tell your children to just shut up? And the wife says, no, they are our children. Why do you say they should just shut up? They are not just my children. Then it generates into an argument. I know of a case where a man's wife was actually the one who purchased food items and everything prior to the lockdown for the family. And the man was insisting the wife give him some for a woman he was planning to marry as a second wife. And the wife refused. And the man beat up the wife for that. So like Daiwo mentioned, most of the cases were intimate partner violence that were more frequent. And knowing the sort of challenges that we have in this country, it was difficult because our government interventions on the responsive mechanism of COVID didn't in any way integrate gender. So because of that, our police workforce and other people who were tasked to manage the situation during the partial lockdown were not given any formal training or any instructions around one. When you see a woman running, or if you meet a woman and she says she's running away from an abusive partner, do A, B, C, D. There was nothing like that. Yes, there was a hotline, but the hotline served no purpose because if you report, there are no shelters to put you in. In Accra, we have the ACT shelter, then we have a national one. There are no more. In other regions, there's almost nothing. In Upper East, there's one shelter, and that shelter was turned into an isolation center during COVID. So it shows the depth of our own commitment towards responding to some of the issues. So a woman is running, meets the police asks, where are you going? And then the woman is like, my husband is beating you, and the police is like, well, go home. Go and keep quiet. Our government, unlike other African governments like South Africa, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and other countries, actually made civil society and non-governmental organizations who are providing services around sexual and reproductive health rights and gender-based violence, including shelter and other support services, essential workers. So they were free to move around to help victims at the time of the lockdown. We never had that status in Ghana. And apart from that, the police were not equipped enough. If you give me a hotline and I call and the person is asking me questions, then the person says, oh, you're left to lockdown now, we will come and rescue you. What if the person kills me before then? You know, right. So our situation didn't provide any alternative for victims to survive on. You know, and also included in that is the fact that some of these CSOs who were providing the services were forced to close down. So I spoke to a few of them who told me that there was a limit to how far they can go in rescuing victims because they get to certain points, the police understand them by looking at their ID card. They get to other points and the police insists that no way, just go back to your house. We are not allowing you to move. And one big major issue was also that when you go and withdraw a victim, where do you put the victim immediately? Because you need to run a COVID test to be sure the person is not positive. So for our foundation, for instance, if they tell you that, okay, we will help you, Vodafone provided them with a transit shelter where they needed to put victims who will go through a test, and if they tested negative, they will now go and integrate them into their main shelter. The other question is who pays for the test, knowing how expensive it was at the time, and how soon is the test result going to come for you to immediately respond to the person's case. You know? So during the time of COVID, there were a host of challenges, and one of the outcomes
I think we're losing Bashir. Okay, I think we've lost Bashir Tamor again. But we will come back to, I think she was making some really important points there. So we'll come back to her eventually. But Daiwo, do you want, our next question that we want to go over is, I'm sure we all, I mean, we've been talking about this. We've been we've been sort of been going around and
we might have the upsurge in teenage pregnancy case
Bashir,
We have a whole cases.
Bashir, sorry, your line is breaking, so we're going to pause for a second. I think now I might have lost both of them. Just keep.
I was gonna.
Do you want to add? Yeah.
I'm learning so much about sexual and gender-based violence from this conversation. I wish I could just listen to. This is a very, very resourceful, just like our comments in the comment section. So I appreciate that all of the education really that Bashiratu, Samuel, that Will are providing for us. And I just wanted to add, just before they come back, and it looks like Bashiratu is back, but I just wanted to come back and maybe interpret some of my own understanding of what we are talking about here, right? That we inhabit, and when we say we in Ghana, right, we inhabit a very complex, very complicated social, cultural environment when it comes to the issue of sexual and gender-based violence, in the sense that, and this is not distinct from the role of the state, right? I always say that we should, when it comes to issues like that, issues that affect not just individuals, and this is clearly an issue that is not affecting people simply on an individual basis, right? There's no amount of victim blaming that will excuse these behaviors. So what then would the state do? What is the role of the state, right? It seems like, and the reason I say this is that it doesn't look like, when Samuel was speaking before he got cut off several minutes ago, he was talking about all of the different, conventions and different things that we have signed up to as a country. And I think that I will also mention a few of the things that, so it looks like there are state structures, laws, and policies in place, right, to protect not just women, but we're talking about women here because obviously this is a very gender-based situation. But it looks like there's a lot of laws and policies in place that should protect women. But it's still not seen, sexual and gender-based violence is still not seen as a big enough problem. I think personally that's how I feel, right? I feel like we don't see it as a big enough problem. We don't see it as an everyday something that we have to worry about as a society. It only becomes news when somebody dies, right? What about all of the women, well, some men too, but disproportionately women who are every day being abused physically, psychologically by their partners in their homes, at work by their bosses, right? And I feel like we are not seeing it as a big enough problem. And that's also because of, as Bashiratu talked about earlier, it's also because of the fact that the people in charge at very different levels, organizationally, and even in terms of the state, right? Overwhelmingly, it is men who are making the decisions. It is men who are making the determinations about what is important. What should we spend our resources as a country on? What are the things that we should prioritize as a country, right? And I feel like this is a very good argument for including more women in our government, and even below government level.
Right. No, you're making absolutely great points there, Eric. We do have an image that I want us to show quickly, because that sort of corresponds to what Eric is saying, that this is kind of it's an everyday occurrence. The ones that we hear on the news are maybe 1 out of 10, right? So, for instance, in March alone, this represents the number of reported, right? So I'm sure there are others that are not reported, but at least in the month of March alone, Beatrice allegedly murdered by her husband. The man got arrested while he secretly sent her body to the mortuary in the Ketu area. We have Margaret Sam, also allegedly murdered by husband at Olibu in Accra. We have a man murdered pregnant girlfriend. We have Elizabeth Yasutor, 31, who also was beaten to death by her boyfriend. So as you can see in this list, and again, this is just March 2021 alone, the number of reported murders, and of course, this is mostly predominantly women in here as well. So my question is this: I mean, I'm sure there is the consequences to society, and I will, and Majority did talk about that earlier. But Daryl, what do you think is the effect of this on society at large? Now, of course, again, even though it is predominantly women are the ones that are predominantly affected, it is not only a women's issue, right? So it is gender-based violence affects society as a whole. So what do you think are some of the effects here? And I do want to hear what you have to say, and then I'll move on to Ashurja as well. Sorry, you're muted again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I want to add quickly to the fact that one of the reasons why we don't see sexual and gender-based violence being prioritized as something we should invest in is our own expectation as people and how we value some of these things enough to hold our political and social leadership accountable for. For example, in Ghana, we are perpetually in an election mode, and our governments want to win election. And so they want to do things that people see that, oh, I've built a school, I've built a ABCD. And so putting money into the quality of life of people becomes difficult, because at the end of the day, when you are saying that, oh, I invested so much into addressing sexual and gender-based violence, the citizenry itself, are we holding our leadership accountable enough for this? So this is food for thought. Now, I move quickly to the implications, the effect of sexual and gender-based violence on society at large. I would say that our peace and security as a country is hinged on the fact that we are able to address sexual and gender-based violence right from the private before it comes out into the public. Now, when there is intimate partner violence, the home is unsafe. Children learn violent acts and abuse. Homes break up. And so these children end up becoming true ones. They run to friends. These friends introduce them to all sorts of things. And this puts the whole society at risk. You have a lot of issues about Sakawa these days. I believe that if we had peace in the home or between partners in the society, some of these things could be addressed. The impact of sexual and gender-based violence is so there that I say two because I've already said one. The general safety, security of society is hinged on this. If in any society we hear that, oh, there is one murder, two murder, three murder, there is fear and panic in that society. Now, when there is fear and panic, now we firefight as a people. And so we begin to look for resources that we would use otherwise to do other development projects to firefight some of these things. Whereas we could have done a lot in the preventive aspect to educate, to sensitize, to ensure that the laws that we have are working. These are not being done effectively. And so while there is that state of peace and lack of peace and security, we begin to firefight. and it costs a lot. And I'll say that sexual and gender-based violence has a very high cost, even for investor confidence. Because as a nation, if investors hear that when we come, there is abuse, there is violence, there is killing, would they come and invest their resources in your country? So it has implications for the country, it has implications for the society, it has implications for our resources as a family. And then apart from that, our productivity is also affected.
Right.
Where I am working, and I know that I am capable of doing a certain work, and the motivation is for me to be promoted or given an incentive, but an authority, somebody is demanding sexual favor in order to give me that reward, that promotion, to be confident in myself that, oh, what I'm doing has earned some recognition, then there is a problem. And so it can even affect the individual's productivity. Where there is harassment at the workplace, for example, it can also affect the individual's productivity. So the impact of sexual and gender-based violence can be dire. And aside that, when there is abuse, there is violence, there is physical harm. So the time that the person will use to do an economic activity and get resources to support herself, to support her family, her children, society, that valuable time will be spent getting treatment. And the resources that are supposed to be used to address or to meet the needs of the family will also be invested in treatment. And so the implications of sexual and gender-based violence, they are wide and far. And there are many.
Right. No, thank you so much. This is exactly what we need to hear as a nation, and I think, sometimes people make the economic case for respecting the human rights of another person, and I think you definitely laid it out, in a very elaborate way, that there are several effects of sexual and gender-based violence on our economic productivity, and even family cohesiveness, on child psychology. I mean, so there's a lot in here which I think that we need to hear as a nation. So I do have a question for Bashira too. So what are some of the challenges you face in your work? 'Cause I'm sure there are a lot of challenges as an activist, in your, working against sexual and gender-based violence. So tell me, what are some of the challenges? And of course, Zyril, you can contribute to this as well. But in your own activist work, what are the challenges? I'm sure you do face a lot of the challenges. And also to our viewers, don't forget to post comments on Facebook. If you have questions, I've seen one question which I will bring to the panelists in just a second here. But don't forget to post your questions and your comments, and we will definitely respond to them. But yes, please go ahead. Sure.
Okay. So, like you acknowledge, the challenges are enormous. The challenges are enormous, and there is one of the biggest of the challenges includes the pushback that we get from potential perpetrators or perpetrators who have not been reported yet. So you find a group of people who, even though deep down they know what you're talking about is the truth, but because they are avoiding you empowering their own victims, so that they can also come up, they need to find every means possible to stop you. And this cuts across in all dimensions, on social media, in person-to-person activism, in forums, even sometimes in workshops. You find people commenting in ways that you ask yourself, is this person actually for real? No. And there's also an issue about the disappointment and I don't know how to put it, in our own systems. There is an institutional breakdown when it comes to issues around sexual and gender-based violence, right from the onset. Because when it happens, you need to report. When you report, an action has to lead to something for you to be confident to say that I'm following up with a case. Protection needs to be given to the victim. In most cases, we do not even have victims being bold enough to report because why? They are protecting their church. They are protecting their family. They are keeping the honor that has already been broken within them, inside them. So they fail to even report. So someone comes to you privately to tell you, you are helping the person up. Then you ask the question, do you want us to take this case up? Then the person says no. Because I don't know what my family would say. They would say I have reported my husband to the police and the pastor will call me. And it happens. The religious leaders are the ones who are not helping us in the work we do. Because they will consistently be on your neck to say that and I'm not talking just in the space of the church. Opinion leaders in our areas and even some imams have been doing this. A case is reported, you are going on with the case, the man needs prosecution, and the next thing is, I want to see you. And then the next thing is, I want to handle the case from now on. And in most cases, you hear them that Omo Patan 500 Ghana cedis, 1,000 Ghana cedis, an amount of money that cannot erase the emotional and psychological trauma a victim will go through forever and ever. These issues we are discussing like this have led to a lot of women not refusing to get married or having men come closer to them, or even refusing to have children because they think they have failed themselves, so they might fail other children they bring forth. And there's also the issue around the medical fees. So a rape or defiled victim walks up to the hospital from the police station, is going for checkup, and a doctor is demanding 300 Ghana cedis. And you don't even have that money. So now the money that you use to eat self, no day. How you go get 300 Ghana cedis to give to a doctor? Before the doctor goes on with the treatment and everything to give you the report. And without the report, how can a rape victim, a defiled victim, go forth with a case? Right. What evidence do you have? So people end up getting frustrated, and we have paid sometimes you just don't know what you have to do again. Because most of the times we have to put our hands in our pockets to use our own personal monies to be paying. And when you speak with the doctors, they tell you that it is not because they want to chop the money. It is because when they are called into the court or in a space to come and testify, they need to fuel their vehicle and the state will not pay them for it. And the National Health Insurance does not cover this. And there's also an issue around the safe spaces for these victims pending the time that you are done with the case. So you are dealing with the case, the victim has been bold enough to report, you are taking over the case, and then where do you keep the victim whilst you go on with the issue? So if it is the husband, if it is the father, if it's the uncle, if it's the guardian, the one paying their school fees and feeding and clothing them, what do you do with the victim? There are no shelters to put the victims in to start with. So are you going to be the one housing all victims in Ghana? Can you keep up with it? And it is even worse for persons living with disability, because for them, in the current research I'm doing, one of them told me, a blind person, she said that the police asked her to go and identify the victim and come and call them. This is a blind person. So how do I go identifying the victim? And then another one said the police asked her to go and show them the place where it happened. And this is somebody who the people just picked up, took somewhere, molested her, and then brought her back and threw her somewhere. And for those who are deaf and dumb, when they go to the hospital, one of the major challenges they have is a communication issue. How do you even begin telling your story when they are going through counseling? Because we all know how our system is. The police does not even understand. So it is the victim who has to provide a sign language interpreter for the police. Otherwise, case, young short statement. And another challenge has to do with people like me and you who cannot even read or write. When they go to the police station and their statements are being taken, they cannot read to even confirm that this is what has been written for me. So in the end, if anyone comes, if the perpetrator is arrested and the perpetrator is brought to the police station and the perpetrator finds a way of paying themselves through, and the police changes the statement, and you come and say, Madam, why didn't you go to I just a team fufro? Because you can't even read and write your own statement. But here is the case: we are not even allowed to record the statement of a victim to authenticate whether what the police is saying is true or not. And cases have been thrown out of court because of this. And look at our justice system, the frustration people have to go through in the court. You go to court today, tomorrow. Meanwhile, you are a poor worker bee that is doing their job. Where do you start from? You know, that you have to spend all your money in transportation, going to the court, getting to see the lawyer and leaving your job, which is also at risk at the time. You know, so most of these issues does not help. And when you go to the workplace, the problem of the inability of workers to freely join trade unions is one of the biggest challenges that they are facing. Because when you are one person, it is very easy for an employer to exploit you and abuse you in any way they want, and nobody can do anything to them. But when you find yourself with a union, because they know the union is protecting and shielding you, it is difficult. And the union ensures. So in most of the workplaces that we have, where we work, we have what we call the collective agreement, which has provisions of conditions of service for workers way better than what the Labor Act offers. And this collective agreement, most of it have clauses on sexual and gender-based violence at the workplace. And in most cases, if it happens and there is evidence to show that someone did it, then it ends up in summary dismissal. So these categories of workers are more protected. What about the many, many, many workers who are not in a union? One, it affects their livelihood, because if you can't put up with it, you have to resign. People are put up for redundancy and layoffs or pay cuts because they refuse sexual advances. So once there is going to be a redundancy, your name will end up there because you didn't agree. Then people go through a lot of psychological traumas at the workplace, you know, and people even suffer alienation at the workplace because you have gone to report the most loved person in the workplace for sexually harassing, and because other people do not want to believe you. Yes.
Yeah. How about you in this work? How much in your own sort of pushing for gender equality, for instance? What has been the pushback that you yourself have also experienced?
Well, as a person, I did mention issues around religion and issues around religious leaders. You know, I have had on countless occasions, I have been threatened in my personal inbox. Those who follow me on Facebook know that I'm very loud on these issues. So you end up receiving threatening messages in your inbox. If people know you personally, people are actually bold enough to send you threatening messages. I have an activist colleague on online space who was she was nearly raped just recently, just because there was an issue that we were consistently talking about, that someone needed to be arrested for what they did. I have had people putting pressure on my spouse to stop me in most of the instances. There was one case that I took to FIDA in Kumasi that we were following up on. My husband received a lot of calls and pressure, you know, so that he would get me off the case, because the case actually involved a very high profile person who was an imam in Kumasi. And my husband has consistently told them that it is a work. And when it comes to these things, I do not interfere in any way. And also the fact that I do not want anything of sex to happen to my daughter or my sister, or even her, you know, so I do not have to stop her. If you think you are innocent, then leave her. If you follow up with a case and then you are proven innocent, that is it. You know, apart from that, you have other family members putting pressure on you, you know, to desist from some of the cases. I have been a little lucky in the space that I work in, that my bosses will go all the way to support me with all the resources they have available. If there is a case at the workplace that we need to follow up on, you know, that I don't need to run around looking for financial resources to help me with the cases. And also the fact that they've been also supportive, because when we do the collective agreement, when we are reviewing documents, it has to pass through me. So I need to do a gender audit to make sure that the laws and the policies that we are making are reflective and responsive to the needs of women at the workplace, so that we can guarantee that they stay in work. They are not threatened with poor recommendation. They are not threatened with no promotion. Nobody is threatened with no wage rise. There is nobody is also threatened with unsatisfactory evaluation. So that once you don't make a certain mark, your job is also threatened, and no one, especially, is threatened with the loss of job. But this work is a risky job, and it is the path we have chosen. So on daily basis, we have to just assure ourselves that because of the prayers we receive from the victims we work with, we will be fine. And that is what is keeping us going.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it takes a lot of self-motivation and courage to do what you are doing now. So thanks so much for that. Daewoo, do you have anything to add? We have about 4 minutes, 2 minutes or 4 minutes before we jump onto the last two questions. Do you have anything to add in terms of what sort of challenges that you also encounter being an activist in this particular area? Sorry. Yeah.
So quickly, I would want to add that sometimes when you do this work, you advocate, people now know their rights and they are reporting. When the issue gets to the police and the law courts, the interference from leadership sometimes halts the case. That is one issue I want to bring on board. Then secondly, we tend to focus on the perpetrator with very little support. In my space, that has been one of the challenges. Very little support for the victims. So a woman or a girl who goes through sexual abuse would need psychological counseling. Most of these victims do not have access to this psychological counseling. And sometimes too, when you encounter some of these victims and you encourage them to report, because of stigma, some of them just refuse to report. And you have to do a lot of work to get them there. And then also, once you continue to push, as Bashiratu said, you are seen as the too known one. And so there is all eyes there on you. So briefly, these are the few things I would want to add to the challenges.
Thank you so much for that. There is a question from one of our viewers on Facebook that I would like for us to answer, or attempts to answer. Let me just read that. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. So she, Dorothy is saying, how about gender violence against queer or LGBT people because of the general antagonistic attitude towards them? How do they even report violence against them? To whom do they make such reports? So, I'm not sure how this extends to what you do in your current works, but if there is any response that you have to this particular question, I would definitely love to hear that.
Well, issues around LGBTQI is it comes in manifold. There is violence from the sex community against LGBTQI people, like the recent one we all saw from the police, raiding their offices and people actually attacking them in open space without them getting any form of support or protection from anyone, which is very sad. And then also there is some level of violence that they also suffer, like the intimate partner violence that we are talking about. But the question is our system responsive, to their issues? If the security agencies that are supposed to protect you are the ones attacking you, do you dare go to report a case to them? That is the situation we find ourselves in this country. And that's the horrible truth, that they cannot go to the police to even report or proceed to the hospital, because we still have the moral police and the religious police all over, including medical practitioners who will easily give you away because they think you are doing the devilish thing. quote and unquote. You get it. So in the end, they become more vulnerable because till now, nothing has been done about their issue with the police attacking them. There have been cases around Kaneshi where someone was attacked and I think they inserted a stick into his anus. So the system is it is not friendly, not 1%, not even 0.1% to them. So it is very difficult, except for institutions, civil society or non-governmental organizations that are providing those services to them. I cannot say on any authority that they can enjoy any sort of protection from the Ghana Police Service, because the Ghana Police Service itself is clamping down on them, which is very unfortunate and very sad. And this is the reason why we need to start discussions around issues around queer people. We cannot deny the fact that queer people are humans and they are part of our society and they need protection. And even as a human institution, we all need to come to the realization that if you say that your religion is against them, is your religion for abusing people? Is your religion for killing other people? Is your religion giving you that chance or giving you the right to murder or to look on as someone is being murdered? If your answer is no, you know what to do as a Ghanaian.
No, thank you so much. That is a wonderful response. We do have, because of time, I'm gonna shrink all the questions and so that we move a little faster. So there is another question here from another viewer. How do we get the government to make shelters a national priority so it gets the same policy visibility like one district, one dam, or one district, one shelter? So Zaiwo, do you want to take this one?
Okay, so yes, currently I think there is a lot of advocacy around the need to establish shelters. And I know that the DV Secretariat, we started this work some time ago, still we are struggling with shelter. And so one, I think that as a people, we have the responsibility to demand from our government what we want our governments to do for us. And so if we recognize that shelters for abused persons is one of our priorities as a people, we have that right to demand that, not only from central governments, but as we enter into another cycle of our medium-term development planning at the district levels. These are things that we as civil society would encourage citizens to bring on board within the consultation processes, so that as we work towards writing a new medium-term development plan, some of these issues are prioritized and are addressed. Now, I think that, yes, Bash is here. One of the things that we should do vigorously as civil society, some of us, we are in government, so yes, our work is around it, yes. But then there is the need, it's a capital intensive thing, because apart from establishing the shelters, there is need for maintenance and sustenance of the shelters. And so we need to begin to think around how government can actually resource our domestic violence fund. And then also the advocacy by civil society organizations must be intensified, one for the shelter, another for the fund, so that in addressing SGBV, we can get holistic, systematic resources to be able to address it for every victim to find solace. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that as well. So we have three more questions. We have a final question that to sort of wrap things up. I know we've it's been a lot today.
Godfrey, just a
yes.
quick one on what Tyrone mentioned.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so on provision of shelter, I like to say that even the civil society organizations who are trying to provide, because when you are done with a shelter, somebody needs to license you, or is it to give you certificates for permission or whatever, and the politics involved in that. I know of one shelter like that had been completed prior to the lockdown. They couldn't operate. So the owners of that shelter, that is the civil society that is in charge of that shelter, ended up renting spaces for victims during the time of the partial lockdown, as much as they could do. As we speak, it was built to be opened, I think, first week in April. It is still not open. So the politics that we see extend to every other aspect. I know of an NGO, an international organization.
Bashiratu, can you tell us more
of
yes. Can you tell us more of the politics? So why is it not opened? I mean, at least I would like to understand.
The politics is what I mentioned. The politics is what I mentioned about somebody giving you a certificate, and the person is a government person, you know.
Right.
It's not a government appointee, but a civil servant.
Right.
Who is supposed to issue out the certificate. And the politics comes in many forms. Paying, or is it that it is about the control over that shelter? In fact, the recent one that was commissioned with support from UNFPA, there is politics around that one too. That was constructed by the United Nations agency that has been handed free of charge with a Buame app to government agency, because two government agencies are fighting, with one saying that it is supposed to be us controlling that shelter, and the other is saying it is supposed to be us. So in the end, you can imagine what will happen to the UN if they decide that these people are not serious.
Right.
Let's stop the funds. You get it. And the other aspect of the shelter is, look at the situation of our social welfare. When they withdraw children, what happens to the children? Look at our orphanages. How is it managed? Resources are not allocated even to finance all these organizations, because if you manage the orphanages well, we know that when you withdraw children, you can even put children there. But here is the case, they are not managing them well. And there's also politics involved in adoption. So someone who can actually take good care of a child who has been withdrawn from violence is not being given the opportunity, because the person probably is not ready to pay something. And the cumbersome nature, a bureaucratic system that we operate, unnecessary one, you know, around the shelter issue. Like I mentioned, during the time of COVID, when people needed the space, because we are all witnessing people calling and reporting cases, because the UNFPA provided a hotline for government, and the government decided to turn a shelter into an isolation center. I mean, who does that when they have the welfare of their citizens at heart? It is not a government shelter, mind you. That's
I think we might have lost.
Was provided by Action Aid Ghana with their own money. The one in Upper East that was turned into an. Okay, I'm back. So the final one I would say is that presently there is an organization during the lockdown. The ED, the country director, the CD of that organization told me specifically after the lockdown, we're having a conversation around sexual and gender-based violence, that they managed to raise an amount of $2 million to support victims, and also around issues of sexual and reproductive health. So because of the lockdown, people could not access family planning, because they could not even travel. So a lot of people missed out on their plans. That is also accounting for the pregnancies that we are recording after all the lockdown, because people missed out on their plan. They couldn't go because organizations who are supposed to be providing them, the family planning unit and marine stores, some of them were closed. And in the hospitals, they were only attending to emergency cases and COVID-related cases. They said they raised the money. They tried, just meeting a government official took them 3 weeks. After that, someone advised that they handed that money to government as part of a COVID relief fund or whatever, so that government can, and they refused. So they left that money and they are using it for something else. So you see, government cannot do all the work, even though we all know it is their responsibility. They are taking our money, they are taking our
Right.
taxes. At the end of
Yes.
the month, when I take my pay slip, sometimes I feel like slapping somebody, you know, and they want us to actually beg them to provide the services that is our right to us.
Right.
And when private people decide to do it, they frustrate them out of the system. And when activists decide to do it, they release their dogs, the people cry, what do they call them? The foot soldiers, to threaten and harass you. So I am an activist and I am doing this work free of charge. Nobody is paying me apart from the full-time work I do. No, my own credit, my own everything. Nobody is paying me, and I'm still threatened. And government cannot even protect me because journalists are not safe. You know, so the issues around shelter provision and everything is tough. When the ACT shelter closed, it was individuals and civil society that contributed to get that shelter opened again, because there was no shelter. And ACT opened again, and it was just Vodafone that decided to give them a transit center during the partial lockdown where they can be putting victims. So imagine if the ACT shelter was a government entity and Vodafone was trying to help. The frustration Vodafone will go through. You know, so I think, yes, activists are doing our best. Government is not paying us. Nobody is paying activists, online activists, for doing the work they do online. Nobody is even asking them questions about how they are dealing with their own violence, the violence they face. Me, I have faced this several times. I faced one related to gender-based violence in 2019. I am a Muslim. Just because I spoke about an Islamic text that talks about violence in the Quran, that it was problematic. And I insisted that it might be translation that lost the substance of that because the text is in Arabic, classical Arabic. Translated, there are some words you cannot find the same meaning in another language like English. So you try to find the closest in meaning. And once you do that, you lose the meaning of the text. In some instances, you can't even find a word in English language. So you end up cooking your own word and putting it there. Yes, we will say that it's between the person who did the translation and God. What about the lives that are suffering because of that? Whether it's a mistake, whether it's a deliberate thing. You know, let's even try translating a tree statement into English and see how it sounds. So you want to make it sound good, end up with something else. You know, so those are some of the issues we have to do. I mean, I have had people tell my husband and call me names like homebreaker. You know, and it is something I have learned to live with. Once it is the right thing I'm doing, me, I don't care.
Exactly.
You know, so the issues around shelter is tough. The last one I would say is that people living with disability cannot even access any of the shelters that we have because of stigma. Secondly, when they have to access the shelter, if someone is blind, the person needs someone who will help them. So they need 2 spaces for one person, for one issue. Thirdly, the infrastructure is not friendly. So if it's somebody who uses a crutches or who uses a wheelchair, who will be doing the work of helping them into their rooms and back? Who will be doing the work of helping them if they need to fetch water to go to the bathroom to bath? Who will be helping them with other provisions? And also, there's also an issue about stigma, even that can happen around where the shelters are. You know, but because government has reneged on it, this is the problem we are facing. Because if government was doing its work, we wouldn't have to go through the double trauma, you know, of fighting for women, or fighting for children, or fighting for people living with disability, you know, and all the different categories of vulnerable people that we have in this country. It is just sad, but we just have to keep on the fight, because I'm sure that one day we will get there.
Right. No, thank you so much for that as well. No, I don't know about.
Can I add one final little thing to that, ending by Bashiratu. I just wanted to add that, first of all, I'm so excited that we got to speak to Bashiratu, to Dawel, and to someone who was not able to join us later. This is such an exceptional panel, so thank you so much. I just wanted to add this one bit about, because this is also connecting to something that Dawel said earlier on about the societal push, right, that we need for some of these things to happen. I say these things, some of the advocacy for these things. Governments will not see the need to invest for political reasons, right? In for instance, shelters and other structural, infrastructural things that will help alleviate some of these really complex but also really pervasive issues that we're talking about with sexual and gender-based violence. But one thing I want to add is that this thing will not succeed, for instance, this whole conversation, this whole situation about gender and sexual-based violence will not go anywhere if men don't join in this fight. And so as a man, I just want to say that men should speak up more. I know men personally who in private conversations, we talk about how awful these things are, but they are afraid to speak out in public about these things because they don't want the pushback, right? They don't want the public, pushback. They don't want to seem like a feminist or whatever, right? Because of the demonization of feminism and so on. But it's also the situation where, as somebody would say, this is not pie, right? You don't lose, as a man, you don't lose your rights just because women will get more rights, right? And so I think that one of the things I want to say is men should be more vocal, should be more upfront, should join this conversation, right? About this. These are not black and white issues, but there is a way, right, to be able to say simply that gender-based violence, whether it's against men or women, of course, we've already accepted that this is a very, very significantly women issue, but whether it's against men or women should not have a place in our society. And whether I'm a man or a woman, I should be able to speak out against it. I should be able to, because people are watching us, our children are watching us, right? And sometimes when it feels like when, I have a friend who would never, talk about gender-based violence, even as a problem. They would never accept that it's a problem. And then the first time I heard them speak about it, it was because their cousin had been sexually assaulted by a man, right? And so he was so incensed. Why did he do that? He has to go to jail. I'm like, well, this is terrible. But you didn't think this was a problem until it happened to your cousin, right? And it doesn't have to happen to someone your cousin, your wife, your daughter, or even your son, before you realize that this is a problem that we need to talk about. That's one thing I wanted to add to this very brilliant conversation.
Thank you so much. I mean, as Eric says here, even though gender-based violence is disproportionately affects women, this is it affects everyone, as Dawel and Bashiratu has just talked about. This is a communal problem. This is not a woman's problem or only a woman's issue, or right, but it is everybody. It does affect everyone. So definitely all hands on deck when it comes to gender-based violence. Now, for the final thing, before we sign off this brilliant panel, what should we do moving forward, right? What should we do as an individual, maybe on the government level, on the structural level? But maybe let's start from a very individual level in our daily lives. What can we do as lay people? So just to wrap up the talk for today, what can we do as individuals in our daily lives? What can we do to support or to address gender-based violence? And I can start with Dawel and then move on to Shart if she's still here. Sorry, you're
all right. So the first thing I would say is that Yes, the state can protect you, other organizations can protect you, but your security is in your hands. One, you must know your rights, and you must take every step to take that right. When you encounter abuse, you should not let anybody deprive you from seeking help. Seek help. When the challenges come, there are ways you can go about them. Number two, in a relationship, relationships are meant for companionship. And we realize that most of the sexual and gender-based violence that happen as a country are intimate partner violence and happen within the domestic relationships. And so I would say that before you enter a relationship, if you pick signs of violence, extreme jealousy, a man who is overly controlling, and a man who demonstrates to you that he could abuse, please do not enter such a relationship. Your security is in your hands. Once you enter that kind of relationship, the same society that expects you to stay within the marriage, even within abuse, will be the one to crucify you if you want to come out of the relationship. And so do not just enter a relationship because you are growing, because you think you need economic support from a man. No. Build yourself, have your own economic support system, enter into a relationship on your own terms. And then when there is abuse, you can stand and report it. And so briefly, this is what I'll say. And as citizens, when you are in a society and somebody is going through abuse, it is our collective responsibility to support that person to report. If the person is unable to report, we also have responsibilities to bring such issues to bear. And so we all have a role to play in ending sexual and gender-based violence. It can never be an individual work. It is a collective work as societies, as individuals, as nations, and as institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Because of time, you have to bring this to a close, but what you said here really resonates with me a lot, and I'm hoping with a lot of people who are viewing, who are watching, who are listening to us. I just want to, reemphasize what you just said. Enter into a relationship on your own terms, and also it is our collective responsibility to report gender-based violence. And importantly, we all have a role to play in making sure that every person, every human in our community, in our society, is safe from gender-based violence. So thank you so much for being with us today. Again, we'll come again in 2 weeks with a different topic. I really appreciate our two wonderful panelists, Bashiratu and Daewoo, for staying along with us for an hour. For about an hour, 40 minutes. I know it's late in Ghana. So enjoy the rest of your evening, of your day, wherever you are in the world, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.